In the frost-choked valleys of the Zorothian highlands, where the wind carried the screams of the fallen, and the earth was scarred by relentless shelling, Corporal Varenne Holt stood as a solitary sentinel against the tide of war. It was February 1964, and the Arendorian War, a brutal, decade-long struggle between the Allied territories and the Dravonian coalition, had turned the highlands into a graveyard. The 8th Vanguard Battalion, tasked with defending a crumbling outpost called Ironspik, was the last line of defense against a Dravonian offensive that threatened to overrun the entire Western Front. Varenne was 27, a lean figure with sharp gray eyes and hands, hardened by years of farm work in the rolling fields of Elmswood. He wasn't born for war. He'd been a poet, a dreamer, who wrote verses about the stars before the draft pulled him into the mud. But war had forged him into something else, a soldier whose quiet strength anchored his squad, the Iron Wolves. They called him scribe for the letters he wrote for his men, words they couldn't find for their families back home. Varenne carried those letters in a tin box, a sacred duty he'd never failed. The Iron Wolves were a family of 7, each scarred by the war but bound by trust. Lieutenant Mara Cade, their leader, was a firebrand with a strategist's mind, her voice a beacon in the chaos. Private Elias Whisperdane, the scout, moved like a shadow, his eyes always scanning the horizon. Corporal Lila Doxorin, the medic, had a gentle touch and a fierce will, patching wounds with a mother's care. Private Torin Hawkvell was the sharpshooter, his aim as steady as his sarcasm. Private Rinforge Taro, the engineer, could build a barricade from rubble and still crack a grin. And Private Sella Sparkfren, the youngest, carried a radio and a stubborn hope that kept them all going. They were Varen's reason to fight, to live, to write. Ironspik was a fortress of despair, a cluster of sandbag bunkers and shattered walls perched on a jagged ridge. The outpost controlled a pass through the highlands, a choke point the Dravonians needed to seize. For weeks, the 8th Battalion had held it against artillery barrages and infantry assaults, their numbers dwindling from 60 to 19. Supplies were gone, ammunition was scarce, and the radio brought only static. No reinforcements were coming. The Dravonians, with a force of 300, were massing for a final push, their tanks and mortar poised to bury Ironspik. The assault began at dusk, under a sky heavy with snow and smoke. The Dravonians came in waves, their gray uniforms blending with the twilight. Varenne manned a machine gun nest with Hawk, their fire cutting through the enemy's ranks. Mara shouted orders from the central bunker, her map marked with desperate plans. Whisper slipped through the shadows, sabotaging enemy positions. Doc worked frantically, her hands blooded as she dragged the wounded to cover. Forge reinforced the bunkers, his hammer ringing against steel. Spark kept the radio alive, her voice pleading for aid that never came. The first wave cost them dearly. A mortar shell collapsed a bunker, killing 3 men. Hawk took a grazing shot to the arm but kept firing, his curses louder than the gunfire. Varen's nest held, but the machine gun overheated, forcing him to switch to his rifle. The Dravonians pressed closer, their tanks hulking machines called Reapers grinding up the ridge. Varenne saw the fear in Spark's eyes, the exhaustion in Doc's, the defiance in Mara's. He knew Ironspik was lost, but surrender wasn't in him. He'd seen what the Dravonians did to prisoners' camps, torture, oblivion. He'd rather die than let his squad face that. By midnight, the Iron Wolves were down to 9, holed up in the central bunker. The Dravonians had overrun the outer defenses, their tanks circling like wolves. Mara gathered the squad, her face streaked with dirt. "We can't hold the outpost," she said, her voice steady despite the cracks. "But we can hold them here until dawn. If we do, the eastern line might have time to regroup." Whisper shook his head. "No one's coming, Lieutenant. We're it. Then we make it count," Varenne said quietly, his voice cutting through the silence. He met Mara's gaze, and she nodded, understanding what he hadn't said. The plan was desperate. The bunker had one last defensive cache of explosives rigged to collapse the pass. If detonated, it would bury the Dravonians' advance, saving the eastern line but trapping the Iron Wolves. Someone had to stay behind to trigger it. Varenne volunteered before anyone else could. "No," Hawk snapped, gripping his rifle. "You're not doing this alone, scribe. You're all getting out," Varenne said, his tone final. "I'll hold the bunker. Get to the eastern ridge. Link up with the line." Doc's eyes filled with tears. "Varenne, we don't leave our own." "You're not leaving me," he said, forcing a smile. "I'm choosing this. For you, for Elmswood, for everyone we've lost." He handed his tin box to Spark. "Get these to their families. Tell them we fought well." The squad protested, but Mara silenced them. He's made his choice. Honor it. They moved out, dragging the wounded, their eyes never leaving Varen. He took position at the bunker's entrance, his rifle ready, the detonator a crude device of wires and a plunger beside him. The Dravonians stormed the ridge, their shouts echoing through the snow. Varen fired, each shot a prayer for his squad's escape. A bullet hit his shoulder, then his leg, but he didn't falter. He thought of Elmswood's fields, of the poems he'd never write, of the letters in his tin box. The Reapers closed in, their cannons roaring. Varen's rifle clicked empty, and he drew his knife, his body screaming but his heart steady. A Dravonian officer appeared at the bunker's entrance, a megaphone in hand. "Surrender, and you'll live," he shouted. Varen spat blood and smiled. "Not today." He slammed the plunger down. The explosives roared, and the pass collapsed in a thunder of rock and fire, swallowing the Dravonian advance. The blast shook the highlands, a final defiance that echoed for miles. Ironspick was gone, and Varen with it. The Iron Wolves reached the eastern ridge, battered but alive. Spark clutched the tin box, her tears mixing with the snow. They linked up with the eastern line, which held because of Varen's sacrifice. The Dravonians' offensive faltered, and the war's tide began to turn. Years later, in Elmswood, in memorial stood a simple stone with Varen's name and those of the Iron Wolves. Spark delivered the letters, each one a piece of Varen's heart. Mara became a teacher, Whisper a ranger, Doc a healer, Hawk a writer, Forge a builder, and Spark a mother. Naming her son Varen, they carried his choice, his sacrifice. In their stories, their lives, Varen Holt was no legend in the history books. His name was one of thousands, a whisper in the wind. But to the Iron Wolves, he was the soldier who chose death over surrender, the brother who gave everything to let them live.